The roar of the crowd filled the air as Sofia Mendoza, a petite yet fierce 18-year-old with determination blazing in her dark eyes, stepped onto the boxing ring. This was it, the moment she had been training for her entire life. The National Women's Boxing Championship title was within her grasp, and with it, the chance to lift her family out of poverty. As she danced around her opponent, landing punch after calculated punch, Sofia's mind drifted to her humble beginnings. Growing up in the slums of Mexico City, she had learned to fight before she could walk. Her father, once a promising boxer himself, had poured his unfulfilled dreams into his daughter, training her relentlessly from the age of 5. The bell rang, signaling the end of the final round. Sofia's heart pounded as she awaited the judge's decision. When her arm was raised in victory, tears of joy streamed down her face. She had done it! She was the new national champion. Little did Sofia know that this moment of triumph would be short-lived, setting in motion a chain of events that would test her resilience, her faith, and her very soul. As she stepped out of the ring, still basking in the glow of her victory, a tall, imposing man in an expensive suit approached her. His name was Alejandro Vega, a well-known businessman and the owner of Vega Enterprises, the largest sports management company in Mexico. "Congratulations, Ms. Mendoza," Alejandro said, his voice smooth as silk but with an underlying current of steel. "I must say, I'm impressed. How would you like to sign with Vega Enterprises? We could make you a star." Sofia's eyes widened. This was beyond her wildest dreams. With trembling hands, she signed the contract Alejandro presented, barely registering the predatory gleam in his eyes. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of photo shoots, interviews, and training sessions. Sofia felt like she was living in a dream. Her family moved out of their tiny, crumbling apartment into a modest house in a safer neighborhood. For the first time in her life, Sofia didn't have to worry about where her next meal would come from. However, cracks soon began to appear in this perfect facade. Alejandro's demands became increasingly unreasonable. He controlled every aspect of Sofia's life: what she ate, when she slept, who she talked to. Her grueling training schedule left her exhausted and irritable. One fateful evening, Sofia arrived at Vega Enterprises for a meeting with Alejandro. As she entered his lavish office, she found him entertaining a group of wealthy businessmen. "Ah, here she is, gentlemen," Alejandro exclaimed, his words slightly slurred from alcohol. "Our little champion from the slums. Come, Sofia, show these men your muscles. After all, that's all you're good for, isn't it?" Sofia stood frozen, humiliation burning through her veins. The men laughed, their eyes raking over her body appreciatively. She had never felt so small, so objectified. I won't do this," Sofia stammered, backing away. "This isn't what I signed up for." Alejandro's face darkened. "Oh, but it is, my dear. You signed a contract, remember? You're nothing but a commodity now. A product for me to sell. And if you don't comply..." He let the threat hang in the air. Tears stinging her eyes, Sofia fled the office. As she ran through the streets of Mexico City, rain began to fall, mirroring the storm of emotions raging within her. How could she have been so naive? She had thought Alejandro was her ticket to a better life, but instead, he had stripped her of her dignity, her dreams, her very identity. Soaked to the bone and shivering, Sofia found herself in front of the old gym where her father used to train her. Through the grimy windows, she could see a group of young girls practicing their punches. Their faces shone with the same hope and determination she once had. A sob escaped her throat as the full weight of her situation crashed down upon her. She had let down not only herself but all those little girls who looked up to her as a role model. How could she face them now? As Sofia stood there, lost in her despair, she didn't notice the old man watching her from the shadows. Carlos Ortega, a legendary boxing coach who had trained some of Mexico's greatest champions, had seen the whole scene unfold. He recognized the look of a fighter who had been knocked down but wasn't out yet. "You know, Chica," Carlos said, stepping into the light, "the true measure of a champion isn't how many times they win, but how many times they get back up after being knocked down." Sofia turned, startled by the unexpected voice. "Who are you?" "Just an old man who's seen too many young fighters lose their way," Carlos replied with a sad smile. "But I see something special in you, Sofia Mendoza. The question is, do you still see it in yourself?" For a moment, Sofia was transported back to her childhood, to the countless hours she had spent training with her father. She remembered the joy of the sport, the pure exhilaration of pushing her body to its limits. Somewhere along the way, she had lost sight of why she started boxing in the first place. I don't know anymore," Sofia admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was living my dream, but it turned into a nightmare. How do I find my way back?" Carlos placed a weathered hand on her shoulder. "The path back is never easy, Chica. But it starts with a single step. Are you willing to take that step?" As Sofia looked into Carlos's kind eyes, she felt a tiny spark of hope ignite in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, all was not lost. With a deep breath, she nodded. "Good," Carlos said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Then let's get to work. The road ahead will be hard, harder than anything you've faced before. But I promise you this, if you're willing to fight, really fight, not just in the ring but for your dignity, your dreams, and your soul, you'll come out stronger than you ever imagined." Little did Sofia know that this chance encounter would be the first step on a journey that would test her limits, challenge her beliefs, and ultimately lead her to a confrontation that would change not only her life but the lives of countless others. As she followed Carlos into the gym, the rain outside began to let up, and a faint rainbow appeared on the horizon. It was as if the universe itself was acknowledging Sofia's decision to rise above her circumstances and reclaim her destiny. Inside the gym, the rhythmic sound of fists hitting punching bags filled the air. The familiar scent of sweat and determination wrapped around Sofia like a comforting blanket. For the first time since her encounter with Alejandro, she felt like she could breathe again. Carlos led her to a small office in the back of the gym. The walls were covered with old boxing posters and newspaper clippings, telling the stories of countless champions who had risen from nothing to claim glory. "Sit down, Chica," Carlos said, gesturing to a worn chair. "Before we begin, I need to know your story. Not the one they tell on TV, but the real story. Who is Sofia Mendoza, and what is she fighting for?" As Sofia began to speak, pouring out her hopes, dreams, and fears, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. She told Carlos about her family's struggles, her father's sacrifices, and the crushing pressure she felt to succeed. She spoke of the intoxicating allure of fame and fortune that had led her to sign with Alejandro, and the soul-crushing realization that she had sold herself short. Carlos listened intently, his eyes filled with understanding and compassion. When Sofia finished, he leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "Listen to me, Sofia. What Alejandro did to you is unforgivable, but it's not the end of your story. It's just the beginning of a new chapter. You have a fire inside you that no one can extinguish. But to truly succeed, you need to fight not just for yourself, but for something bigger." Sofia furrowed her brow. "What do you mean?" Carlos stood up and walked to a dusty shelf, pulling down an old photo album. He opened it to reveal a picture of a young woman, her fists raised in triumph. "This was my daughter, Maria," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She was a lot like you, talented, determined, with dreams bigger than the sky. But the boxing world chewed her up and spit her out. She didn't make it. Sofia's heart clenched as she realized the implication behind Carlos's words. I'm so sorry, she whispered. Carlos nodded, closing the album gently. I couldn't save her, but maybe I can help save you. And not just you, but all the other young fighters out there who are being exploited by people like Alejandro Vega. Are you willing to be a part of that fight? In that moment, Sofia felt something shift inside her. The humiliation and despair that had been consuming her began to transform into a steely resolve. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore, she was fighting for every underdog, every dreamer who had ever been told they weren't good enough. Yes, she said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. I'm ready to fight. But how do we take on someone as powerful as Alejandro? Carlos's eyes twinkled with a mixture of mischief and determination. One step at a time, chica. First, we need to get you back in fighting shape, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. Then, we start gathering evidence. I have a feeling Alejandro's operation isn't as clean as he'd like people to believe. As Carlos outlined his plan, Sofia felt a surge of excitement. This wasn't just about reclaiming her boxing career, it was about exposing the corruption that plagued the sport she loved and protecting future generations of fighters. However, their conversation was interrupted by the sudden arrival of Sofia's younger sister, Lucia. The 16-year-old burst into the office, her face streaked with tears. Sofia! Thank God I found you, Lucia gasped, trying to catch her breath. It's Papa. He's in the hospital. Alejandro's men, they came to our house, demanding you fulfill your contract. When Papa refused to tell them where you were, Sofia's blood ran cold. The consequences of her actions were already affecting those she loved most. As she rushed out of the gym with Lucia, Carlos's words echoed in her mind, the road ahead will be hard, harder than anything you've faced before. Little did Sofia know that this was just the beginning of a battle that would push her to her limits, force her to confront her deepest fears, and ultimately lead her to a truth that would shake the foundations of the boxing world. As the sisters raced towards the hospital, the sun began to set over Mexico City, casting long shadows across the streets. The coming night seemed to herald the darkness that Sofia would have to navigate in the days ahead. But deep within her, a fire had been rekindled, a fire that would light her way through the trials to come. The sterile corridors of the hospital seemed to stretch endlessly as Sofia and Lucia raced towards the emergency room. The rhythmic beeping of machines and hushed whispers of medical staff created an eerie backdrop to their frantic search for their father. Finally, they found him. Jorge Mendoza lay motionless on a hospital bed, his face a canvas of bruises and cuts. Sofia felt her knees buckle at the sight, guilt washing over her like a tidal wave. Papa, she whispered, grasping his hand gently. I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. Jorge's eyes fluttered open, focusing on his daughter with difficulty. Sofia, he croaked, his voice barely audible. My little champion. Don't blame yourself. It was that devil, Vega. As Sofia and Lucia kept vigil by their father's bedside, the full extent of Alejandro's cruelty began to unfold. Jorge recounted how Alejandro's men had stormed into their home, demanding Sofia's whereabouts. When Jorge refused to cooperate, they had beaten him mercilessly, leaving him for dead as a message to Sofia. Rage bubbled up inside Sofia, mingling with her guilt and fear. She had never felt so helpless, so trapped. But as she looked at her father's battered face, a steely resolve began to form in her heart. She couldn't let Alejandro win. She had to fight back, not just for herself, but for her family and for every other victim of Alejandro's ruthless ambition. As dawn broke, casting a pale light through the hospital windows, Sofia made a decision. She would return to Carlos and accept his offer of help. But first, she needed to ensure her family's safety. Lucia, Sofia said, turning to her sister. I need you to do something for me. Take Papa and go to Aunt Maria's farm in the countryside. Don't tell anyone where you're going, not even me. I'll find a way to contact you when it's safe. Lucia's eyes widened with fear and confusion. But Sofia, what about you? Where will you go? Sofia squared her shoulders, channeling the strength she had always found in the boxing ring. I'm going to fight back. I'm going to take down Alejandro Vega and expose him for the monster he is. As Sofia left the hospital, she felt a mix of emotions churning within her. Fear for her family's safety, anger at Alejandro's actions, and a glimmer of hope inspired by Carlos's words. She made her way back to the old gym, her mind racing with plans and possibilities. Carlos was waiting for her, as if he had known she would return. One look at her face told him all he needed to know. It's time, he said simply. Over the next few weeks, Sofia threw herself into training with a fervor she had never known before. By day, she honed her body, pushing herself to new limits under Carlos's expert guidance. By night, they pored over documents, pieced together clues, and built a case against Alejandro Vega. Carlos introduced Sofia to a network of allies, former boxers, investigative journalists, and even a sympathetic police detective named Elena Fuentes. Each had their own reason for wanting to see Alejandro brought to justice, and together, they formed a formidable team. As they delved deeper into Alejandro's operations, a disturbing pattern emerged. Sofia wasn't the first young athlete Alejandro had exploited. There were dozens of others, boxers, soccer players, runners, all lured in with promises of fame and fortune, only to be used and discarded when they were no longer profitable. One name in particular caught Sofia's attention, Maria Ortega. With a jolt, she realized this must be Carlos's daughter. The old coach confirmed her suspicion, his eyes clouding with pain as he recounted Maria's story. Alejandra drove her to the brink, Carlos said, his voice heavy with grief. When she threatened to expose him, he made it look like an accident. A car crash. But I knew. I've always known. Sofia felt a chill run down her spine. The stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. This wasn't just about reclaiming her career or protecting her family. It was about justice for Maria and all the other victims of Alejandro's greed. As their investigation progressed, Sofia found herself drawn into a world of shadows and secrets. She learned to move undetected, to gather information without raising suspicion. Elena taught her the art of reading people, of spotting lies and half-truths. Carlos continued to train her body and mind, preparing her for the fight of her life. But Alejandro was not a man to be underestimated. As Sofia and her allies closed in, he began to fight back. Mysterious accidents befell those who dared to speak out against him. Witnesses disappeared. Evidence vanished. One rainy night, as Sofia was returning to the gym after a covert meeting with a potential whistleblower, she sensed she was being followed. Her instincts, honed by years in the ring, screamed danger. She quickened her pace, her heart pounding in her chest. Suddenly, a hand grabbed her arm, pulling her into a dark alley. Sofia reacted instantly, her fist connecting with her attacker's jaw. But as she prepared to flee, a familiar voice stopped her in her tracks. "Sofia, wait! It's me!" Sofia squinted through the darkness, her eyes widening in shock as she recognized the face before her. Javier? Javier Rodriguez had been her first love, her childhood sweetheart from the barrio. They had drifted apart as Sofia's boxing career took off, but the sight of him now brought a flood of memories rushing back. "What are you doing here?" Sofia demanded, still on guard. "Are you working for Alejandro?" Javier shook his head vehemently. "No, I swear. I'm here to help you. I've been working undercover in Vega Enterprises for months, gathering evidence. I couldn't stand by and watch what Alejandro was doing to you and others like you. Sofia's mind reeled. Could she trust Javier? Or was this another of Alejandro's traps? As if reading her thoughts, Javier pulled out a USB drive. Here, he said, pressing it into her hand. This contains financial records, emails, everything you need to bring Alejandro down. But you have to be careful. He suspects there's a mole in his organization. It's not safe for me to stay. Before Sofia could respond, Javier leaned in and kissed her softly. Be safe, mi amor, he whispered, then disappeared into the night, leaving Sofia standing in the rain, clutching the USB drive like a lifeline. Back at the gym, Sofia shared her encounter with Carlos and Elena. The detective immediately began analyzing the data on the drive, her eyes widening as she scrolled through the files. This is it, Elena breathed. This is everything we need. Financial fraud, blackmail, even evidence linking Alejandro to Maria's death. With this, we can bring him down. A surge of triumph coursed through Sofia, but it was tempered by a nagging doubt. It seems too easy, she said. Why would Javier take such a risk? And how did he get access to all this information? Carlos nodded gravely. You're right to be cautious, chica. In this game, nothing is ever as it seems. We need to verify every piece of information before we make our move. As they worked through the night, cross-referencing the data and building their case, Sofia couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. The pieces fit together almost too perfectly, like a puzzle with a hidden picture beneath. Dawn was breaking when Sofia's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Her blood ran cold as she read the message. The hunter becomes the hunted. Meet me at the old warehouse on Calle Obregon at midnight if you want the truth. Come alone, or your sister pays the price. Sofia's heart raced. How did they know about Lucia? She had been so careful to keep her family hidden. As she debated what to do, another text came through. This one contained a photo that made her gasp in horror, Lucia, bound and gagged, fear evident in her eyes. I have to go, Sofia said, showing Carlos and Elena the messages. I can't risk Lucia's life. It's obviously a trap, Elena warned. We should inform my superiors, get a team together. No. Sofia interrupted. They said to come alone. I won't gamble with my sister's life. Carlos placed a hand on Sofia's shoulder, his eyes filled with understanding and concern. I know I can't stop you, chica. But remember your training. Trust your instincts. And know that we'll be nearby if you need us. As midnight approached, Sofia made her way to the abandoned warehouse, her senses on high alert. The dilapidated building loomed before her, a hulking shadow against the starlit sky. With a deep breath, she stepped inside. The interior was pitch black, the silence broken only by the sound of her own heartbeat. Suddenly, a spotlight flicked on, momentarily blinding her. As her eyes adjusted, she saw a figure standing in the circle of light. Hello, Sofia, said a smooth, familiar voice. I've been expecting you. Sofia's jaw dropped in disbelief. Standing before her, with a smug smile on his face, was none other than Javier. No, she whispered. It can't be. Javier's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. Oh, but it is, mi amor. Did you really think it would be so easy? That you could bring down a man like Alejandro Vega with a few documents and your righteous anger? As Sofia stood frozen in shock, more lights came on, revealing a circle of Alejandro's men surrounding her. And there, in the center, was Alejandro himself, looking as polished and composed as ever. I must admit, you've led us on quite a chase, my dear, Alejandro said, his voice dripping with false kindness. But did you really think I wouldn't have eyes and ears everywhere? Javier has been my most loyal employee for years. He was the perfect bait to lure you out. Sofia's mind raced, trying to process this betrayal. All this time, Javier had been playing her, feeding her false information, leading her into this trap. But one thing didn't add up. "Where's Lucia?" she demanded. "If you've hurt her, I swear dash." Alejandro laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. "Your sister is perfectly safe, probably still tucked away at your aunt's farm." The photo was a simple manipulation. You see, Sofia, in this world, loyalty is a commodity. And Javier here has proven his loyalty time and time again. Javier stepped forward, his eyes hard and unfamiliar. "It was never personal, Sofia. It's just business. Surely you understand that by now." As Sofia looked into the eyes of the boy she once loved, she felt something inside her break. But from that broken place, a new strength emerged. She had been naive, trusting too easily, seeing the world in black and white. Now she understood the shades of gray, the complexity of the game she was playing. "So what happens now?" Sofia asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. "You kill me and bury the evidence?" Alejandro shook his head, a predatory gleam in his eye. "Oh no, my dear. Death is too simple, too final. No, I have much grander plans for you. You're going to help me expand my empire. With your talent and my resources, we'll be unstoppable. And if you refuse..." He let the threat hang in the air. Sofia's mind raced. She was outnumbered, outmaneuvered. But as she looked around the warehouse, she began to notice details, the positioning of Alejandro's men, the exits, the shadows where Carlos and Elena might be hiding. Her training kicked in, and a plan began to form. "You're right about one thing, Alejandro," Sofia said, her voice taking on a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "Death is too simple. But so is your vision of the future. You see, while you were busy setting this elaborate trap, you missed something crucial." Alejandro's smug expression faltered slightly. "And what might that be?" Sofia allowed herself a small smile. "The fact that I'm not the scared little girl you humiliated all those months ago. I'm a fighter. And fighters? We never give up." With lightning speed, Sofia lunged forward, her fist connecting with Javier's jaw in a devastating uppercut. As he crumpled to the ground, chaos erupted in the warehouse. Gunshots rang out as Elena and her team burst in from hidden positions. In the melee that followed, Sofia found herself face to face with Alejandro. The businessman's polished facade had cracked, revealing the desperation beneath. "It's over, Alejandro," Sofia said, her voice steady. "Your empire is crumbling as we speak. Elena's team has been gathering evidence for months. The USB drive? A decoy to make you overconfident. You've lost." As the reality of his situation sank in, Alejandro's face contorted with rage. He lunged at Sofia, but she was ready. Years of training took over as she dodged his attack and delivered a series of precise blows that left him gasping on the ground. As the dust settled and Alejandro was led away in handcuffs, Sofia felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, triumph, but also a deep sadness for the innocence she had lost along the way. Carlos appeared at her side, pride shining in his eyes. "You did it, chica. You brought him down." Sofia nodded, her gaze fixed on Javier as he too was taken into custody. "We did it. All of us. But at what cost?" As dawn broke over Mexico City, casting a golden light over the scene, Sofia realized that this was not the end of her journey, but merely the beginning of a new chapter. She had faced her demons, both external and internal, and emerged stronger. But the fight for justice, for herself and for others, was far from over. With a deep breath, Sofia stepped out of the warehouse into the new day, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. She was no longer just a boxer, no longer just a victim. She was a champion in the truest sense of the word, a fighter for truth, justice, and the dreams of those who had been silenced. As she walked away from the scene, her phone buzzed with a message from Lucia. "Are you okay? When are you coming home?" Sofia smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. It was time to reunite with her family, to heal, and to plan for the future. A future where she would use her voice and her fists to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. The sun climbed higher in the sky, promising a new day filled with possibilities. And Sofia Mendoza, the young champion who had been humiliated but never broken, was ready to seize every one of them. The weeks following Alejandro Vega's arrest were a whirlwind of activity for Sofia Mendoza. As the star witness in the high-profile case against the disgraced sports mogul, she found herself thrust into a spotlight far different from the one she had dreamed of as a young boxer. Reporters hounded her at every turn, their questions a constant barrage of "How did you bring down Vega and her prizes?" and "What's next for Sofia Mendoza?" She handled their inquiries with a grace that surprised even herself, her experiences having forged her into someone far stronger and more composed than the naive girl who had first signed that fateful contract. But behind closed doors, away from the cameras and microphones, Sofia grappled with the emotional fallout of her ordeal. Nightmares plagued her sleep, filled with shadowy figures and betrayals. The face of Javier, the boy she had once loved and who had betrayed her so completely, haunted her waking hours. It was during one particularly sleepless night that Sofia found herself wandering the quiet streets of her old neighborhood. The familiar sights and sounds of the barrio brought a bittersweet comfort, reminding her of simpler times. As she turned a corner, she came face to face with a ghost from her past. Javier's mother, Dona Rosario, stood before her, looking older and more careworn than Sofia remembered. "Sofia," Dona Rosario breathed, her eyes wide with a mix of emotions, surprise, shame, and something that looked almost like hope. I didn't expect to see you here." Sofia felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to turn and run, to avoid this painful reminder of Javier's betrayal. But another part, the part that had been forged in the fires of her recent trials, stood her ground. "Dona Rosario," she replied, her voice steady. "It's been a long time." The older woman's eyes filled with tears. "Sofia, mi hija, I am so sorry for what Javier did to you. I raised him better than that, I swear it. I don't know where I went wrong." Sofia's heart clenched at the raw pain in Dona Rosario's voice. Despite everything, she found herself reaching out to comfort the woman who had once been like a second mother to her. "It's not your fault," Sofia said softly. "We all make our own choices." Dona Rosario grasped Sofia's hands, her grip desperate. "Please, Sofia. I know I have no right to ask, but Javier. He's in so much trouble. The lawyers say he could go to prison for years. I know what he did was wrong, but he's still my son. Is there anything you can do?" Sofia felt as if the ground had dropped out from beneath her feet. Here she was, being asked to help the very person who had betrayed her, who had nearly cost her everything. The old Sofia might have lashed out in anger, might have taken satisfaction in Javier's downfall. But the Sofia who stood there now, tempered by her experiences, found herself considering Dona Rosario's plea. She thought of Carlos, of the wisdom he had imparted during their training sessions. True strength, he had told her, is not about how hard you can hit, but about how much you can forgive. I can't promise anything, Sofia said carefully. But I'll see what I can do. As she walked away from Dona Rosario, Sofia's mind raced. Could she really consider helping Javier after everything he had done? And even if she wanted to, what could she possibly do? Her musings were interrupted by the ringing of her phone. It was Elena, the detective who had become both mentor and friend during the investigation. Sofia, we need to talk, Elena's voice was urgent. There's been a development in the case. Can you meet me at the station? An hour later, Sofia sat across from Elena in a small, windowless room at the police station, trying to process what she had just heard. Are you sure about this? Sofia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elena nodded gravely. The evidence is clear. Javier wasn't just working for Alejandro. He was being blackmailed. Alejandro had information about Javier's father, information that could destroy his family if it ever came to light. Sofia's mind reeled. Javier's father had abandoned the family when Javier was just a child, leaving Dona Rosario to raise him alone. It had been a source of shame and pain for the family for years. What kind of information? Sofia asked, not sure if she really wanted to know the answer. Elena hesitated, then pushed a file across the table. Javier's father, he's alive. And he's been working for a rival cartel all these years. Alejandro discovered this and used it to force Javier's cooperation. He threatened to expose the connection, which would have put Javier's entire family in danger of cartel retaliation. Sofia's head spun as she tried to absorb this new information. It didn't excuse Javier's actions, but it cast them in a new light. He had been trying to protect his family, just as she had been. As she left the police station, Sofia found herself standing at a crossroads, both literally and figuratively. To her left was the path that led to the courthouse, where she was due to give her testimony against Alejandro and his associates, including Javier. To her right was the road that led to the prison where Javier was being held. With a deep breath, Sofia made her decision. She hailed a taxi and gave the driver the address of the prison. It was time to confront the ghosts of her past once and for all. The prison visiting room was cold and stark, a far cry from the warm afternoons Sofia and Javier had once spent together in the barrio. When Javier was let in, Sofia barely recognized him. Gone was the cocky smile and the confident swagger. In their place was a broken man, his eyes haunted by the weight of his choices. Sofia, Javier breathed, his voice cracking. I didn't expect to see you here. Neither did I, Sofia replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. But we need to talk, Javier. About everything. For the next hour, Sofia listened as Javier poured out his story. He spoke of Alejandro's threats, of the fear that had driven him to betray not just Sofia, but himself. He spoke of sleepless nights and the crushing weight of guilt. I know it doesn't change anything, Javier said, his eyes pleading. What I did to you was unforgivable. But I want you to know that it killed me inside, every day. You were the best thing in my life, Sofia, and I threw it all away. Sofia sat in silence for a long moment, processing everything she had heard. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but firm. You're right, Javier. It doesn't change what happened. You made your choices, and we both have to live with the consequences. But I understand why you did it. And I forgive you. Javier's eyes widened in disbelief. You forgive me? Just like that? Sofia shook her head. Not just like that. It's not easy, and it doesn't mean I forget. But holding on to anger and resentment, it only hurts me in the end. I've learned that the hard way. As she stood to leave, Sofia paused. I'm going to talk to the prosecutor. I can't promise anything, but I'll tell them about the blackmail, about the threat to your family. Maybe it will make a difference in your sentencing." Javier's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Sofia. I don't deserve your kindness." "No, you don't," Sofia agreed. "But that's not why I'm doing it. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. Because it's who I want to be." As Sofia left the prison, she felt as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The pain and betrayal were still there, but they no longer defined her. She had faced her past and come out stronger. But little did Sofia know that her journey was far from over. As she stepped out into the sunlight, a sleek black car pulled up beside her. The window rolled down, revealing a face that made Sofia's blood run cold. "Hello, Ms. Mendoza," said a smooth, cultured voice. "I believe we have some matters to discuss." Sofia's heart raced as she recognized the man, Xavier Vega, Alejandro's younger brother and the heir apparent to the Vega Empire. She had heard whispers about Xavier during the investigation, rumors of a man even more ruthless and cunning than Alejandro. "I have nothing to say to you," Sofia said, turning to walk away. "Oh, but I think you do," Xavier replied, his voice like silk over steel. "Unless, of course, you don't care about what happens to your dear friend Carlos." Sofia froze, her heart pounding. "What are you talking about?" Xavier's smile was predatory. "Let's just say that old Carlos has some skeletons in his closet that are itching to come out. It would be a shame if his role in certain past indiscretions were to come to light, wouldn't it?" Sofia's mind raced. What could Xavier possibly have on Carlos? And how far was she willing to go to protect the man who had become like a father to her? As she stood there, caught between fear and defiance, Sofia realized that her fight was far from over. The Vega Empire might have lost its king, but a new player had entered the game, one who seemed even more dangerous than the last. With a deep breath, Sofia made her decision. She opened the car door and slid into the back seat beside Xavier. As the car pulled away from the curb, she steeled herself for whatever was to come. The game had changed, but Sofia Mendoza was ready to play. She had faced betrayal, overcome humiliation, and found strength she never knew she possessed. Whatever Xavier Vega had in store for her, she would face it head-on. As the car wound its way through the streets of Mexico City, Sofia's mind was already working, formulating plans and strategies. She had brought down Alejandro Vega against all odds. Now, it was time to take on the entire Vega Empire. The sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. To Sofia, it looked like the dawning of a new chapter in her life, one filled with danger, intrigue, and the chance to finally bring justice to those who had long thought themselves above the law. As Xavier began to outline his proposition, Sofia listened carefully, her face a mask of calm. But beneath the surface, the fire that had made her a champion in the ring burned brighter than ever. The young girl who had been humiliated and betrayed was gone. In her place stood a woman ready to change the world, one fight at a time. The car disappeared into the gathering darkness, carrying with it the promise of new battles to come. For Sofia Mendoza, the real fight was just beginning. The sleek black car glided through the neon-lit streets of Mexico City, its tinted windows concealing the tension-filled scene within. Sofia Mendoza sat rigidly, her eyes never leaving Xavier Vega's face as he outlined his proposition. "It's quite simple, Ms. Mendoza," Xavier said, his voice smooth as aged tequila. "I want you to be the new face of Vega Enterprises. A rising phoenix from the ashes of scandal, if you will. Your story of triumph over adversity is exactly what we need to rebrand and rebuild." Sofia's mind raced, trying to process the audacity of Xavier's offer. "And if I refuse?" Xavier's smile didn't reach his eyes. then I'm afraid your mentor, Carlos, will find himself facing some very uncomfortable questions about his past. Questions that could lead to the end of his career, his freedom, and quite possibly, his life. The threat hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Sofia's hands clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palms. What exactly do you have on Carlos? Let's just say that his hands aren't as clean as you might think, Xavier replied cryptically. But that's not your concern. What you need to focus on is your decision. Will you join us, Ms. Mendoza? Or will you sacrifice Carlos to maintain your moral high ground? As the car pulled up to a luxurious high-rise, Sofia realized she was trapped. She needed time to think, to plan, to find a way out of this impossible situation. I need time to consider your offer, she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Xavier nodded, seemingly pleased. Of course. I'll give you 48 hours. But remember, Ms. Mendoza, time is a luxury that Carlos may not have. As Sofia stepped out of the car, she felt as if she had entered a surreal nightmare. The glittering lights of the city seemed to mock her, a stark contrast to the darkness that threatened to engulf her world. She spent a sleepless night pacing her small apartment, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. How could she betray everything she had fought for by aligning herself with the Vega Empire? But how could she sacrifice Carlos, the man who had believed in her when no one else did? As dawn broke, Sofia made a decision. She couldn't face this alone. It was time to call in reinforcements. Hours later, Sofia sat in a secluded booth at a rundown cafe on the outskirts of the city. Across from her sat Elena, the detective who had become her ally and friend. Sofia had just finished recounting her encounter with Xavier and the impossible choice she faced. Elena's face was grim. This is worse than we thought. Xavier Vega is not a man to be underestimated. If he's making a play to rebuild the Vega Empire, we need to tread very carefully. But what about Carlos? Sofia asked, her voice tight with worry. What could Xavier possibly have on him? Elena sighed, a look of deep sadness crossing her face. Sofia, there's something you need to know about Carlos. Something we discovered during our investigation of Alejandro, but, well, it wasn't relevant to the case at the time. Sofia felt a chill run down her spine. What is it? Carlos, he wasn't always the honorable coach, you know, Elena began, her voice low. 20 years ago, he was deeply involved in the underground betting scene. He fixed matches, blackmailed fighters, did whatever it took to turn a profit. Sofia shook her head in disbelief. No, that's impossible. Carlos would never dash. People change, Sofia, Elena interrupted gently. The Carlos you know is a man seeking redemption for his past sins. But if Xavier has proof of Carlos's old activities, it could destroy him. Sofia sat back, her mind reeling. The man she had come to see as a father figure, the pillar of integrity who had guided her through her darkest times, had a past as checkered as those he fought against. It was almost too much to bear. But as the initial shock wore off, a new determination took hold. Carlos had given her a second chance, had believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. Now it was her turn to fight for him. So what do we do? Sofia asked, her voice steady with resolve. Elena leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with a mix of admiration and concern. We play their game, but we play it our way. You're going to accept Xavier's offer, Sofia. What? Sofia exclaimed. How can I dash? Listen to me, Elena cut in. This is our chance to take down the entire Vega Empire once and for all. But to do it, we need someone on the inside. Someone they think they can control. As Elena outlined her plan, Sofia felt a glimmer of hope. It was dangerous, perhaps even more so than her fight against Alejandro. But it was also their best chance at saving Carlos and finishing what they had started. The next day, Sofia found herself once again in Xavier Vega's opulent office, this time of her own volition. She steeled herself as she delivered her rehearsed lines. "I've considered your offer, Mr. Vega," she said, infusing her voice with just the right amount of reluctance and defeat. I accept." Xavier's smile was triumphant. "Excellent decision, Ms. Mendoza. I assure you, you won't regret it." As Xavier launched into his plans for Sofia's new role as the face of Vega Enterprises, she allowed her mind to wander, thinking of the web of lies and deception she was about to enter. She was no longer just a boxer fighting in a ring. She was stepping into a much larger arena where the stakes were life and death, and the opponents were shadows and secrets. Over the next few weeks, Sofia found herself thrust into a world of glitz and glamour that made her head spin. Press conferences, photo shoots, charity galas, Xavier paraded her around like a prized trophy, the living embodiment of Vega Enterprises' commitment to reform and second chances. But behind the scenes, Sofia was hard at work. Every document she could access, every conversation she overheard, every detail that seemed out of place, all of it was carefully catalogued and passed on to Elena. Slowly but surely, they began to piece together the true extent of the Vega Empire's corruption. It was at a lavish fundraiser, 3 months into her charade, that Sofia's carefully constructed world threatened to crumble. As she mingled with Mexico City's elite, a familiar face caught her eye. Her heart nearly stopped as she recognized Javier, looking dashing in a tailored suit, working the room with easy charm. Their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then Javier was making his way towards her, a complex mix of emotions playing across his face. "Sofia," he said softly as he reached her. "You look incredible." Sofia fought to keep her composure. "Javier, what are you doing here? I thought you were in prison?" Javier finished with a wry smile. Let's just say that Xavier Vega is very good at making problems disappear when it suits him. Before Sofia could respond, Xavier appeared at her side, his hand possessively on her lower back. "I see you two have been reacquainted," he said smoothly. "Javier has joined our legal team. His unique perspective will be invaluable as we navigate the challenges ahead." Sofia's mind raced. Javier working for Vega Enterprises? Had his redemption been just another act? Or was he trapped in the same impossible situation she found herself in? As the evening wore on, Sofia felt as if she were drowning in a sea of lies and half-truths. Every smile felt forced, every laugh hollow. She had never felt more alone. It was in this moment of vulnerability that fate dealt another cruel blow. As she excused herself to get some air on the balcony, she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. "The old man is becoming a liability," came Xavier's voice, low and menacing. "It's time we dealt with Carlos Ortega once and for all." Sofia's heart pounded as she pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear more. But the conversation was cut short by the arrival of other guests. She slipped away, her mind a whirlwind of fear and determination. She had to warn Carlos, had to find a way to protect him. But how could she do that without blowing her cover and losing everything they had worked for? As she made her way back to the party, Sofia caught sight of herself in a gilded mirror. The woman who stared back at her was a stranger, beautiful, polished, but with eyes that held secrets and sorrows beyond her years. In that moment, Sofia realized just how far she had come from the naive young boxer who had once dreamed of glory in the ring. But there was no time for self-reflection. She had a mission to complete, a mentor to save, and an empire to bring down. With a deep breath, Sofia plastered on her most dazzling smile and rejoined the party, her mind already formulating plans within plans. Little did she know that the true test of her strength and resolve was yet to come. For in the shadows of the Vega Empire lurked secrets darker than she could have ever imagined, secrets that would shake her to her very core and force her to question everything she thought she knew about herself and those around her. As the night wore on, Sofia found herself increasingly on edge. Every laugh seemed too loud, every smile too bright. She felt as if she were balancing on a knife's edge, one wrong move away from total disaster. It was in this state of heightened awareness that she noticed something odd. A man she didn't recognize, dressed as a waiter but carrying himself with a tension that spoke of danger, was making his way through the crowd with purposeful steps. His hand kept straying to his jacket pocket in a way that set off alarm bells in Sofia's mind. Without thinking, she began to follow him, her instincts from the boxing ring kicking in. As the man approached Xavier, who was deep in conversation with some investors, Sofia's suspicions crystallized into certainty. This was an assassination attempt. Time seemed to slow down. Sofia saw the man reach into his jacket, saw the glint of metal. Without hesitation, she launched herself forward, her body moving with the fluid grace of a trained fighter. "Xavier, look out," she cried, tackling the startled businessman to the ground just as a gunshot rang out. Chaos erupted in the ballroom. Screams filled the air as guests scrambled for the exits. Security guards swarmed around them, quickly subduing the would-be assassin. As Sofia picked herself up, her ears ringing from the gunshot, she found herself face to face with Xavier. His usually composed facade had cracked, revealing a mix of shock, fear, and something else. Gratitude? You saved my life," Xavier said, his voice barely above a whisper. Before Sofia could respond, they were surrounded by security personnel, whisking them away to a safe room. As the adrenaline began to fade, the full impact of what she had done hit her. She had saved the life of the man she was trying to bring down. The man who was threatening Carlos. The man who represented everything she had fought against. In the confined space of the safe room, Xavier's eyes never left Sofia. "Why did you do it?" he asked, his voice tinged with genuine curiosity. "You could have let him kill me. It would have solved all your problems." Sofia met his gaze steadily. "That's not who I am," she said simply. "I don't let people die, no matter who they are or what they've done." Something shifted in Xavier's expression then, a softening around the eyes that made him look suddenly vulnerable. "You truly are remarkable, Sofia Mendoza," he said softly. "I'm beginning to understand why my brother was so obsessed with you." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of the police, led by none other than Elena. As Sofia gave her statement, she could feel Xavier's eyes on her, calculating, reassessing. Hours later, as dawn broke over the city, Sofia finally returned to her apartment. She was exhausted, her nerves frayed to the breaking point. But she knew she couldn't rest. Not yet. She had barely closed the door when her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Roof. Now. Come alone." Sofia's heart raced. Was this a trap? Had her cover been blown? But she knew she had no choice. Whatever was waiting for her on the roof, she had to face it. As she stepped out onto the rooftop, the cool morning air whipping at her hair, she saw a figure standing at the edge, silhouetted against the rising sun. As she approached, the figure turned, and Sofia gasped. It was Carlos. "Mihija," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "We need to talk." Sofia's mind reeled. How was Carlos here? What did he know? As she stood there, caught between joy at seeing her mentor and fear of what his presence might mean, Sofia realized that the game had changed once again. The sun continued to rise, casting long shadows across the rooftop. In those shadows, Sofia could almost see the threads of fate that had brought her to this moment, threads of love and betrayal, of strength and vulnerability, of redemption and damnation. As she took a step towards Carlos, Sofia knew that she was walking into yet another chapter of her increasingly complex story. But this time, she was ready. Whatever revelations awaited her, whatever challenges she would face, Sofia Mendoza would meet them head-on. For she was no longer just a boxer, no longer just a pawn in someone else's game. She was a fighter in every sense of the word, and she would not rest until justice was served and the truth, all of it, was brought to light. "I'm listening," Sofia said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. "Tell me everything." And as Carlos began to speak, the city below them stirred to life, unaware of the drama unfolding high above its streets, a drama that would soon shake the very foundations of power in Mexico City and beyond. The morning sun cast long shadows across the rooftop as Sofia stood face to face with Carlos, her mentor and father figure. The city below was stirring to life, oblivious to the earth-shattering conversation about to unfold high above its streets. "Mi hija," Carlos began, his voice heavy with the weight of untold secrets. "What I'm about to tell you will change everything. Are you prepared for that?" Sofia squared her shoulders, channeling the strength that had carried her through countless battles in the ring and beyond. "I'm ready, Carlos. No more secrets, no more lies. Tell me everything." Carlos took a deep breath, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and resolve. "It all began 30 years ago, long before you were born. I was a different man then, ambitious, ruthless, willing to do whatever it took to climb to the top of the boxing world." As Carlos spoke, the story he wove was one of corruption, betrayal, and a web of lies that stretched back decades. He told of his rise through the ranks of Mexico's boxing scene, not just as a coach but as a power player in the shadows. He spoke of fixed matches, of fighters pushed beyond their limits, of fortunes won and lost on rigged bets. "But that's not the worst of it," Carlos continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "There was a young fighter, much like you, Sofia. Full of talent and dreams. His name was Miguel Vega." Sofia's breath caught in her throat. "Vega? You mean?" Carlos nodded grimly. "Alejandro and Xavier's older brother. He was going to be the next great champion, the pride of Mexico. But he knew too much, saw too much of the corruption in the sport. He threatened to expose it all." A chill ran down Sofia's spine as she began to understand where this story was leading. "What happened to him, Carlos?" The old coach's eyes filled with tears. "There was a match, supposed to be Miguel's big break. But the fix was in. He was supposed to take a dive in the 4th round. When he refused, things got ugly. The beating he took in that ring, it wasn't just a loss. It was a message." Sofia felt as if the ground was shifting beneath her feet. Did Miguel die?" Carlos shook his head slowly. "Not then. But the damage was done. He was left in a coma, hidden away in a private facility. Alejandro and Xavier were just boys then. They were told their brother had died in a car accident. The truth was buried, along with Miguel's broken body. The implications of this revelation crashed over Sofia like a tidal wave. The Vega brothers' ruthless ambition, their iron grip on the sports world, it all stemmed from this buried trauma, this lie that had shaped their entire lives. "But why are you telling me this now?" Sofia asked, her mind racing to connect the dots. "After all these years, why risk everything?" Carlos's expression hardened with resolve. "Because Miguel Vega is alive, Sofia. He woke up from his coma 6 months ago." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Sofia processed this bombshell. "Alive? But how? Where?" "He's been kept hidden, his recovery closely guarded," Carlos explained. But he remembers everything. And he's determined to bring down the corrupt empire that was built on his supposed death, even if it means destroying his own brothers in the process. Sofia's mind whirled with the implications. So when Xavier threatened you, when he said he had dirt on your past? Carlos nodded grimly. He knows some of what happened, but not all. He doesn't know his brother is alive, doesn't know the full extent of my involvement. But Miguel knows everything. And he's been working with Elena and me from the shadows, feeding us information, helping us build our case against Vega Enterprises. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Sofia and Carlos talked for hours. The old coach laid bare his soul, confessing to sins long past and the years of atonement that followed. He spoke of his mission to clean up the sport he loved, to protect young fighters like Sofia from the corruption that had once consumed him. I've done terrible things, mi hija, Carlos said, his voice breaking. Things I can never fully atone for. But helping you, training you, it gave me a chance at redemption. And now, with Miguel's help, we have a chance to bring down the entire corrupt system once and for all. Sofia's emotions warred within her, shock at the revelations, anger at the lies, and a deep, abiding love for the man who had become her true father in all but blood. What do we do now? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Carlos's eyes gleamed with a mixture of pride and determination. Now, mi hija, we spring the trap. But it won't be easy. Xavier is smart, ruthless, and after last night's assassination attempt, he'll be on high alert. As Carlos outlined the plan, Sofia felt a familiar fire igniting within her. This was more than just a fight for justice now. It was a chance to heal old wounds, to right ancient wrongs, and to forge a new future for the sport she loved. But even as she committed herself to this dangerous path, a nagging doubt gnawed at the back of her mind. Javier's sudden reappearance, his position within Vega Enterprises, how did he fit into all of this? And what of her own conflicted feelings for Xavier, the man she had saved, the enemy she was coming to understand in ways she never expected? As Sofia left the rooftop, her head spinning with revelations and plans, she knew that the final round of this fight was about to begin. But unlike any bout she had faced in the ring, this one would test not just her strength and skill, but her heart and soul as well. The next few weeks were a blur of covert meetings, clandestine information exchanges, and heart-pounding close calls. Sofia continued to play her role as the face of Vega Enterprises' redemption story, all while working tirelessly behind the scenes to bring the corrupt empire crumbling down. Elena coordinated their efforts from within the police force, carefully building an airtight case against Xavier and his associates. Carlos worked his old contacts in the boxing world, gathering testimony from fighters and coaches who had been silenced for years by fear and payoffs. And at the center of it all was Miguel Vega, the ghost returned to life, the secret weapon they had all been waiting for. Sofia met him for the first time in a safe house on the outskirts of the city. The resemblance to his brothers was striking, but where Alejandro and Xavier radiated cold ambition, Miguel's eyes burned with the fire of righteous vengeance. "You're the one," Miguel said when they were introduced, his voice raspy from years of disuse. "The fighter who's going to help me take back everything that was stolen from me." As Miguel shared his story, the years lost in darkness, the slow, painful journey back to consciousness, and the burning desire for justice that had fueled his recovery, Sofia felt the last pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. But even as their plan neared its culmination, complications arose. Javier, ever present in the halls of Vega Enterprises, seemed to be watching Sofia with increasing suspicion. She caught him rifling through her files late one night, his face a mask of conflicted emotions. "What are you really doing here, Sofia?" he demanded when she confronted him. "Are you still the girl I loved, or have you become something else entirely?" The pain and betrayal in his eyes cut Sofia to the core. In that moment, she realized that no matter how this ended, there would be collateral damage, hearts broken, trust shattered, lives irrevocably changed. And then there was Xavier. The more time Sofia spent with him, the more layers she discovered beneath his polished exterior. She saw glimpses of the wounded boy who had lost his brother, of the man desperately trying to maintain control in a world built on lies. There were moments, brief, fleeting instants, where Sofia caught herself wondering if he could be saved, if there was a path to redemption for him as there had been for Carlos. But such thoughts were luxuries she couldn't afford. Not when they were so close to bringing it all crashing down. The day of reckoning dawned bright and clear. Vega Enterprises was hosting a gala to announce a major new initiative, one that Sofia knew was a front for an even larger money laundering operation. It was to be her crowning moment as the company's new face, the perfect opportunity to showcase their commitment to reform and social responsibility. It would also be their downfall. As Sofia stepped onto the stage, resplendent in a gown that sparkled under the bright lights, she felt the weight of a hidden microphone against her skin. In the audience, Elena and her team waited, arrest warrants burning holes in their pockets. Carlos and Miguel watched from a secure location, ready to testify at a moment's notice. Xavier stood to the side of the stage, a proud smile on his face as he prepared to introduce her. For a brief, heart-wrenching moment, their eyes met, and Sofia saw something there that made her breath catch, a vulnerability, a longing for something real in a world built on illusions. But then the moment passed, and Sofia stepped up to the microphone. This was it. The final round. Everything they had worked for came down to this moment. Ladies and gentlemen, Sofia began, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. I stand before you today not just as a boxer, not just as the face of Vega Enterprises, but as someone who has seen the darkness that can lurk behind the glitz and glamour of the sports world. A hush fell over the crowd. This was not the speech they had been expecting. For too long, corruption has poisoned the very heart of the sports we love, Sofia continued, her voice gaining strength. Athletes exploited, matches fixed, lives ruined, all in the name of profit and power. Today, that ends. She locked eyes with Xavier, saw the dawning realization and betrayal etched across his face. But she pressed on, her words a flood that could no longer be contained. Vega Enterprises has built an empire on lies, on the broken bodies and shattered dreams of countless fighters. But the truth will not stay buried forever. Today, I stand here to tell you that Miguel Vega, the lost brother, the forgotten champion, is alive. Gasps rippled through the audience. Xavier stumbled back as if physically struck. In the wings, Sofia saw security guards moving in, their faces conflicted as they tried to decide whether to obey their standing orders or the new reality unfolding before them. For years, the Vega brothers have ruled through fear and manipulation. Sofia pressed on, her voice rising above the growing murmurs of the crowd. They've silenced those who would speak out, crushed those who dared to stand against them. But no more. Today, we have the chance to cleanse this sport, to reclaim it for the true athletes and fans who make it great. As if on cue, the doors burst open. Elena and her team swarmed in, badges held high. Xavier Vega, Elena's voice rang out, you are under arrest for racketeering, fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. Chaos erupted in the ballroom. Reporters clamored for statements, cameras flashed like strobe lights, and above it all, Sofia's voice continued to ring out, laying bare the sins of the past and the hope for the future. In the midst of the pandemonium, Sofia's eyes found Javier. He stood frozen, his face a mask of shock and dawning understanding. Their gazes locked, and in that moment, a lifetime of shared history passed between them, the love they had lost, the trust that had been shattered, and the faint, flickering possibility of forgiveness. But it was Xavier who commanded Sofia's attention in the end. As Elena moved to cuff him, he broke free, pushing through the crowd toward the stage. Security moved to intercept him, but Sofia held up a hand, signaling them to wait. Xavier reached the edge of the stage, his eyes wild with a storm of emotions, rage, betrayal, and something deeper, more vulnerable. "Why?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "After everything, after I gave you a second chance, why would you do this?" Sofia knelt at the edge of the stage, bringing herself eye to eye with the man she had come to know so well over the past months. "Because it was the right thing to do," she said softly. "Because the truth is more important than power or money or fame. Because sometimes, Xavier, the only way to truly save something is to tear it down and build it anew." For a moment, just a heartbeat, Sofia saw a flicker of understanding in Xavier's eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Without warning, he lunged forward, his hand reaching for something in his jacket. Time seemed to slow down. Sofia saw the glint of metal, heard the shouts of alarm from the security team. But before anyone could react, another figure barreled into Xavier, tackling him to the ground. Javier. As the two men grappled on the floor, Sofia's world narrowed to a pinpoint. She saw the gun skittering across the polished marble, saw Elena and her team moving in to secure Xavier. But all she could focus on was Javier, his eyes meeting hers one last time as he mouthed two words, "I'm sorry." In the aftermath, as Xavier was led away in handcuffs and reporters clamored for statements, Sofia found herself standing alone in the eye of the storm. She had done it. They had done it. Vega Enterprises was finished, its crimes exposed to the world. But as the adrenaline faded and the reality of what they had accomplished set in, Sofia was left with a bittersweet taste in her mouth. They had won the fight, but at what cost? How many lives had been irrevocably changed by the secrets and lies that had finally come to light? As she made her way through the chaos, Sofia caught sight of her reflection in a shattered mirror. The woman who looked back at her was not the same naive young boxer who had once dreamed of glory in the ring. She was something more now, a fighter in the truest sense, battle-scarred but unbroken, tempered by fire and stronger for it. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be trials, both in the courts and in the court of public opinion. The boxing world would need to be rebuilt from the ground up, cleansed of the corruption that had tainted it for so long. But as Sofia stepped out into the bright sunlight, she felt a sense of hope rising within her. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was free from lies, free from manipulation, free to chart her own course. As she walked away from the crumbling remnants of the Vega Empire, Sofia allowed herself a small smile. The final round had been fought and won. Now it was time for a new chapter, not just for her, but for the sport she loved and the countless fighters who would come after her. The young champion who had once been humiliated by an arrogant businessman had emerged victorious. But more than that, she had become a beacon of truth in a world of shadows, a force for change in a system long resistant to it. Sofia Mendoza had started this journey as a boxer. She ended it as a legend. But even as she reveled in the triumph of the moment, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered a warning. The fight might be over, but the war? The war had only just begun. The weeks following the dramatic fall of Vega Enterprises were a whirlwind of court hearings, press conferences, and behind-the-scenes negotiations. Sofia Mendoza found herself at the center of a media storm, hailed as a hero by some and vilified as a traitor by others. But through it all, she held her head high, knowing that she had fought for what was right. As Sofia sat in the crowded courtroom, watching Xavier Vega take the stand, she couldn't help but reflect on the tumultuous journey that had brought her to this moment. The once powerful businessman looked a shell of his former self, his designer suit hanging loosely on his frame, dark circles under his eyes betraying sleepless nights. "Mr. Vega," the prosecutor began, her voice sharp and unforgiving, "please tell the court about your involvement in the cover-up of your brother Miguel's supposed death." Xavier's eyes flickered to Sofia for a brief moment before he began to speak. His testimony was a damning account of decades of corruption, of a family empire built on lies and broken dreams. But as he spoke, Sofia saw something in his eyes that she hadn't expected: regret. "I did it all for the family," Xavier said, his voice barely above a whisper. "To protect our legacy, to build something lasting. I told myself it was worth it, that the end justified the means. But now..." He trailed off, shaking his head. As the trial progressed, more shocking revelations came to light. The extent of the Vega brothers' corruption reached far beyond the boxing world, implicating politicians, judges, and business leaders across Mexico and beyond. It was a web of deceit that had ensnared countless lives, and as each thread was pulled, more victims came forward with their stories. Throughout it all, Sofia found an unexpected ally in Elena. The detective had become more than just a colleague in their fight against corruption; she had become a true friend. It was Elena who stood by Sofia's side as she gave her own testimony, recounting the humiliation and manipulation she had endured at the hands of Alejandro Vega. "You did good, kid," Elena said softly as Sofia stepped down from the witness stand, her eyes shining with pride. But even as justice seemed to be prevailing in the courtroom, Sofia knew that the fight was far from over. The corruption they had exposed ran deep, and there were powerful forces working behind the scenes to maintain the status quo. It was during a late-night strategy session with Carlos and Miguel that Sofia received news that would change everything once again. "Sofia," Carlos said, his voice grave, "we've received a threat. Someone's put a hit out on you and Miguel. They're trying to silence us before the final verdict." Sofia felt a chill run down her spine, but she squared her shoulders, channeling the strength that had carried her through so many battles. "Then we'll just have to hit back harder," she said, her voice steady. The next few days were a blur of increased security measures and tense negotiations. Sofia found herself longing for the simplicity of the boxing ring, where the rules were clear and victory was determined by skill and strength alone. But she knew that this fight, this war against corruption, was far more important than any title bout. It was Javier who provided the breakthrough they needed. Despite his initial betrayal, he had been working tirelessly to make amends, using his inside knowledge of Vega Enterprises to help build the case against his former employers. "I've found something," Javier said, bursting into Sofia's safe house one rain-soaked evening. "A hidden account, offshore. It's got enough dirt to bring down half the government." As Sofia pored over the documents Javier had brought, she felt a glimmer of hope. This could be the key to not just winning the battle, but ending the war once and for all. But their celebration was short-lived. Just as they began to formulate a plan to use this new information, the safe house was rocked by an explosion. Glass shattered, alarms blared, and smoke filled the air. "Sofia!" Javier's voice cut through the chaos. "We've got to get out of here." As they stumbled through the wreckage, coughing and disoriented, Sofia's fighter's instincts kicked in. She grabbed Javier's hand, pulling him towards a hidden exit Carlos had shown her just in case. They emerged into the rain-slicked streets, the sound of sirens growing closer. But before they could catch their breath, a black SUV screeched to a halt in front of them. The window rolled down, revealing a face Sofia had hoped never to see again. Alejandro Vega, somehow free from custody, his eyes burning with a manic intensity. "Get in," he snarled, brandishing a gun. "Now." Sofia and Javier exchanged a look. They both knew they had no choice. As they climbed into the SUV, Sofia's mind raced, trying to formulate a plan. She had come too far, fought too hard, to let it all end like this. As Alejandro drove recklessly through the rain-soaked streets of Mexico City, he began to rant, his words a mixture of anger, desperation, and something that sounded almost like pleading. "You don't understand," he said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "None of you understand. We built an empire. We brought glory and prosperity to this country. And you," he glared at Sofia in the rearview mirror, "you ungrateful little puta, you're destroying it all." Sofia met his gaze steadily. No, Alejandro. You destroyed it yourself. With every fighter you exploited, every match you fixed, every life you ruined. You're the one who doesn't understand. Boxing isn't about empires or glory. It's about heart, about pushing yourself to be better, about inspiring others to reach for their dreams. Alejandro's laugh was harsh and bitter. Dreams? Wake up, little girl. The world doesn't run on dreams. It runs on power and money. And I had both. And look where it got you, Javier interjected, his voice quiet but firm. On the run, desperate, with nothing left but your delusions of grandeur. Alejandro's face contorted with rage. He swerved the SUV violently, causing Sofia and Javier to slam against the doors. Shut up. Both of you. I'm still in control. I still have one last card to play. As the SUV screeched to a halt at the edge of a familiar location, the old gym where Sofia had first learned to box, a sinking feeling settled in her stomach. This was it. The final confrontation. Alejandro herded them into the gym at gunpoint, the once comforting smell of sweat and leather now tainted by the stench of fear and desperation. But as they entered the main training area, Sofia's heart leapt. For there, bound to a chair but very much alive, was Carlos. Mi hija, Carlos said, his voice weak but his eyes blazing with determination. Don't listen to him. Whatever he says, whatever he offers, it's not worth it. Alejandro sneered. How touching. The disgraced coach and his prized pupil reunited at last. But let's cut to the chase, shall we? He turned to Sofia, his gun wavering between her and Carlos. I'm offering you a choice, Ms. Mendoza. A simple trade. Your silence for his life. Sofia's mind raced. She knew she couldn't trust Alejandro, knew that any deal she made would likely end with all of them dead anyway. But as she looked at Carlos, at the man who had become a father to her in all but blood, she felt her resolve waver. Don't do it, Sofia, Javier whispered urgently. We can find another way. But before Sofia could respond, before she could make a decision that would alter the course of all their lives, fate intervened in the most unexpected way. The gym doors burst open, and in strode a figure that caused Alejandro to stumble back in shock, his gun clattering to the floor. Miguel Vega, the long-lost brother, stood framed in the doorway, his eyes blazing with years of pent-up anger and pain. Hello, little brother, Miguel said, his voice laden with emotion. It's been a long time. Alejandro's face drained of color. And Miguel? But how? You're dead. You died years ago. Miguel stepped forward, his movements cautious but determined. Is that what they told you, Alejandro? Is that the lie you've been living with all these years? As Miguel recounted the truth, the fixed fight, the devastating injury, the years spent in a coma and then in hiding, Sofia saw something break in Alejandro. The man who had seemed so powerful, so untouchable, crumpled to his knees, tears streaming down his face. I didn't know, Alejandro sobbed. I swear, Miguel, I didn't know. They told us you were dead. A car accident. I built all of this for you. To honor your memory. Miguel's face softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. And in doing so, you destroyed everything I ever cared about. The integrity of the sport, the dreams of young fighters like Sofia. You became the very thing I was fighting against. As the brothers faced each other, years of lies and misunderstandings laid bare between them, Sofia moved quietly to untie Carlos. She could feel the weight of history in the room, the sense that something monumental was shifting. Suddenly, Alejandro lunged for his dropped gun. But before he could reach it, before anyone could react, another shot rang out. Javier stood there, a small pistol in his hand, smoke still curling from the barrel. Alejandro fell back, clutching his shoulder, his eyes wide with shock and betrayal. "It's over," Javier said quietly. "Enough people have been hurt. Enough lives have been ruined. It ends here." As sirens wailed in the distance, signaling the approach of Elena and her team, Sofia felt a profound sense of closure settling over her. The final round had been fought, not with fists, but with truth and justice. In the days that followed, as the full extent of the Vega brothers' crimes was laid bare to the world, Sofia found herself at a crossroads. The boxing world was in turmoil, shaken to its core by the revelations of corruption and manipulation. Many were calling for Sofia to take a leadership role to help rebuild the sport from the ground up. But as she stood in the quiet of the old gym, her hand resting on the weathered ropes of the ring where she had first learned to fight, Sofia knew that her journey was far from over. "What will you do now, mi hija?" Carlos asked, coming to stand beside her. His wounds were healing, but Sofia could see that the scars, both physical and emotional, would take much longer to fade. Sofia smiled, a mixture of determination and hope shining in her eyes. "I'm going to fight, Carlos. Not just in the ring, but outside it too. For every young boxer who dreams of glory, for every fan who believes in the purity of the sport. We're going to build something new, something better." As she spoke, Sofia could almost see the future unfolding before her. A future where boxing was once again a sport of honor and integrity, where talent and hard work were the only currencies that mattered. It wouldn't be easy, there would be resistance, setbacks, and challenges she couldn't even imagine yet. But Sofia Mendoza had never backed down from a fight, and she wasn't about to start now. Javier approached, his face a mask of repentance and hope. "Room for one more in this fight?" he asked hesitantly. Sofia regarded him for a long moment, weighing the history between them, the love, the betrayal, and the redemption. Finally, she nodded. "There's room for anyone willing to stand up for what's right," she said. As they began to discuss plans for the future, for a new boxing league built on transparency and fair play, Sofia felt a sense of excitement building within her. This was more than just a new chapter in her life, it was a chance to rewrite the entire story of the sport she loved. Months passed, and slowly but surely, change began to take root. Sofia traveled the country, then the world, speaking to young boxers, working with honest promoters and trainers, and slowly rebuilding the trust that had been shattered by years of corruption. There were setbacks, of course. Old guard resistors who clung to their power, attempts at sabotage, and moments of doubt when the task seemed too great. But with every small victory, with every young fighter who looked at Sofia with hope and admiration, she knew that they were on the right path. And through it all, her family, both blood and chosen, stood by her side. Carlos, ever the wise mentor, guiding her through the political minefields of sports administration. Elena, using her investigative skills to root out lingering corruption. Javier, working tirelessly to make amends for his past and to support Sofia's vision of a better future. Even the Vega brothers, in their own way, became part of the story of redemption. Xavier, serving his time but also cooperating with authorities to expose even deeper layers of corruption. And Miguel, finally able to step out of the shadows, working alongside Sofia to ensure that no other fighter would suffer as he had. As for Alejandro, his story took a different turn. Facing years in prison, he made a choice that surprised everyone. He confessed to everything, providing evidence that helped bring down corrupt officials and crime bosses far beyond the world of boxing. It didn't erase his sins, but it was a start. On the eve of the inaugural match of the new era boxing league, Sofia stood alone in the center of the ring in a packed arena. As she looked out at the sea of faces, fans, fighters, and media from around the world, she felt the weight of all they had accomplished, and all that was still to come. A familiar voice called out from the sidelines. "You ready for this, champ?" Sofia turned to see Lucia, her sister, beaming with pride. Beside her stood their father, Jorge, his eyes glistening with unshed tears of joy. Sofia's heart swelled with love and gratitude. This moment wasn't just a triumph for her, or even just for the sport of boxing. It was a victory for every person who had ever dared to stand up against injustice, who had fought for their dreams against impossible odds. As she raised her fists, the crowd erupted in cheers. Sofia Mendoza, the young champion who had been humiliated and betrayed, who had stared into the darkness of corruption and emerged stronger, was ready to lead boxing into a new era. The bell rang, signaling not the start of a match, but the beginning of a new chapter in the history of the sport. Sofia's voice rang out, clear and strong, carrying to every corner of the arena and beyond. Let's show the world what real champions are made of. And as the crowd roared its approval, as cameras flashed and history was made, Sofia felt a sense of peace settle over her. The fight, the real fight, was far from over. There would always be new challenges, new battles to be won. But standing there, surrounded by the sport she loved and the people she trusted, Sofia knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, she was ready. Ready to fight, ready to lead, ready to inspire. For this was Sofia Mendoza's true calling, not just to be a champion in the ring, but to be a champion for justice, integrity, and the enduring power of the human spirit. As the new era Boxing League's first match began, Sofia took her seat at ringside, her eyes shining with the light of a dream fulfilled and the promise of even greater things to come. The young champion's journey had been one of humiliation, betrayal, and triumph, but it was far from over. For Sofia Mendoza, and for the world of boxing she had helped to reshape, this was not the end. It was only the beginning.